My life was filled with a brilliance that everyone envied. My husband, Ethan Brooks, was known as a prodigy of modern architecture and was admired all over the world. I myself, under the name Lily Anderson, had launched the jewelry brand Ethel and achieved great success. We were the perfect partners, respecting each other's talents and elevating one another. At least, that was what I believed. However, one night, I would lose everything. It was during the celebration party for my brand, Ethel winning an International Design Award. Ethan said he had to miss the party because of an unexpected business trip. I felt a little disappointed, but I understood how busy his work was. Yet, in the middle of the party, a single photo sent by a friend overturned my entire world. It showed Ethan and my sister, Claire Anderson, sitting close together at a hotel bar overlooking the Manhattan night skyline. Born as identical twins, we shared looks that resembled a perfect reflection in the mirror. But our inner selves were as different as light and shadow. While I had a calm nature, she was always reckless and ambitious. Claire wanted my very life itself. My success, my fame, and above all, my husband, Ethan. In the photo, Ethan's hand was wrapped around Claire's waist, and Claire rested her head against his chest as if seeking comfort. I felt all my strength leaving my body. The hand holding the champagne glass trembled, and even standing became nearly impossible. I slipped out of the party and jumped into a taxi. When I arrived at the hotel and stood at the entrance of the bar, I spotted them immediately. With the night view behind them, they looked into each other's eyes like lovers at the center of the world. Slowly, but with steady steps, I walked toward their table. When my shadow fell across the table, Ethan finally raised his head. The moment he saw my face, his expression froze for an instant, but it quickly shifted into a cold, emotionless look of resignation and defiance. Lily? At the sound of his voice, Claire slowly turned around as well. Oh, you're early. Has the party already ended? Her composure left me speechless. There was no excuse, no attempt to cover up. It was as if my coming here had been written into the script from the very beginning. As you can see, Lily, there are no more secrets. His words pierced my chest like a knife. My heart, which had expected words like no or it's a misunderstanding, was completely shattered by such an effortless confession. Since when? The voice I barely managed to squeeze out did not even sound like my own. Since when, you ask? Claire chuckled softly, as if she were enjoying herself. All the while you were locking yourself away in your studio, sketching those boring designs. Always the same. Lost in your own little world, so absorbed that you didn't even notice the most important things being quietly stolen away from under your feet. You are truly foolish and pitiful. Claire stood up from the sofa with a triumphant air, and then, as if to deliver the final blow, she declared with chilling clarity, "It's over. Your role has already ended. From now on, I will stand by his side. I will become the new face of this household. Your husband, your fortune, everything you built, now all of it will belong to me." Her eyes glittered with a victory that resembled madness. The world collapsed beneath my feet. The person before me was no longer the sister I once knew. She was a terrifying monster who had smiled at my side all along, only to steal my entire life. I looked at Ethan's face. The man I once loved said nothing, simply allowing Claire to do as she pleased. His silent compliance was, to me, the deepest betrayal of all. There was no longer any reason for me to remain here. Words, tears, even anger, none of them had any meaning anymore. "I see. Very well." That was all I whispered before turning my back on them. "Do enjoy your happiness together. On the ruins of everything I built." Without looking back even once, I left the bar. The following weeks were nothing short of hell. Ethan quickly demanded a divorce and hired a sharp, high-powered lawyer. I became utterly weakened, both physically and mentally, and sank into a deep depression. Forced out of the penthouse, I moved into a small apartment where I kept the curtains shut and simply waited for time to pass. I had no strength to draw jewelry designs, nor the courage to step out into the world again. Every time I looked at my own face in the mirror, I saw Claire's face overlapping with mine, and I was seized by nausea. We share the same face. That fact cut me to pieces like a knife. On social media, Claire flaunted the life I had built as if it had always been hers. She lived in the house where I had once lived, smiling beside the man who had once been my husband. The brand Ethel, which I had nurtured with every piece of my soul, quickly lost its brilliance and collapsed once I, its designer, could no longer function. If things continued this way, I would completely break. I had to escape. From this city, from this past, and from the curse that was Claire. I pulled an old suitcase out from the back of the closet. Inside, I packed only a few clothes I had barely worn, a handful of books, and a small leather case filled with my grandmother's worn tools. My grandmother was a restorer of vintage jewelry. As a child, I loved sitting on her lap, watching broken brooches and rings breathe back to life as if by magic. This was the only connection left to me now. Before dawn, without telling a single soul, I left New York behind. My destination was Paris, the city where my grandmother had once lived and honed her craft as a jeweler. In that city, where no one knew who I was, I resolved to start over again, not from zero, but from below zero. The new home I chose was a small attic room on the top floor of an old apartment building. Every weekend, I went to flea markets and bought discarded vintage jewelry, which I began restoring in my little atelier. I listened to the history and stories carried by each piece and brought them back to life with pure devotion. It was not mere restoration. I added my own sensibilities to the soul of each piece of jewelry. It was a dialogue between past and present, and also a rehabilitation of my creativity. Little by little, I reclaimed the joy of pure creation. In time, my small atelier became filled with revived jewelry. When I began to feel it was too much of a waste to simply gaze at them, I gathered my courage and brought my pieces to a small antique shop. Before long, my work began to gain a quiet reputation through word of mouth. They say there's a designer who can cast magic on broken jewelry. Such whispers quietly spread among antique lovers and fashion-conscious people in Paris. As I began to reconnect with the outside world, my heart slowly started to open as well. My small brand quietly took root in a corner of Paris, becoming known only to those who truly sought it out. I was not yearning for great success. I only wished to breathe new life into what was broken and have someone cherish it once more. That modest joy was enough to fill my heart every single day. Yet life is mysterious, for unexpected doors often open at the most unexpected times. That day, I was once again visiting the weekend flea market. Suddenly, a heavy downpour struck, and I rushed into a tent for shelter. At that very moment, a man dashed inside as well, just as drenched by the rain. He wore a finely tailored tweed jacket, far too refined for a flea market. For a while, we said nothing, simply gazing silently at the violent rain. The silence never felt awkward. On the contrary, it seemed strangely comforting. At last, he spoke quietly. "Quite the rain, isn't it?" Almost as if the sky is trying to wash something away. Though his gaze remained fixed on the rain, his words were undeniably directed toward me. "Yes, it truly is. But it's strange. After the rain, Paris always looks more beautiful than ever." Hearing my reply, he turned his face toward me for the first time. He looked at me intently, then let his eyes fall to the pendant hanging from my neck. It was a silver pendant I had restored myself. "That pendant is wonderful." "Is it old?" "Yes, but I did make a few adjustments to it." "Adjustments?" He furrowed his brows with interest. Hesitantly, I began to tell him about jewelry restoration. He listened with unwavering attention, as if determined not to miss a single word. When I finished, he let out a quiet breath of admiration. "Remarkable. You haven't merely restored its form. You breathed a new soul into this pendant. You respected the memories of the past while granting it the breath of the present. That is the highest form of art." His words seeped into the softest part of my heart like a gentle, warming light. It was not empty flattery. I could see from his sincere eyes that the words came from the very depths of his soul. Thank you. You must be very knowledgeable about art. Well, it's something like my profession. He said this with a gentle smile. Then, offering his hand softly, he said, Ryan Mitchell. I replied, Sophie, and clasped his large, warm hand in return. Ryan Mitchell. At that time, I had no way of knowing that this name belonged to a titan of finance, a man whose power could move the world itself. Nor did I know that he was renowned in hidden circles as an international art collector. As the rain began to ease, we naturally started walking through the market together. We were both surprised to find that our values regarding art and beauty aligned so perfectly, as if we had been lifelong friends. From that day forward, we deepened our connection, and soon Ryan frequently visited my atelier. We would talk endlessly for hours. About art, about history, and eventually, about our lives. Little by little, I confided in him about my past. He listened quietly until the very end. Neither offering pity nor casting blame, he simply accepted my pain as it was. It must have been hard, but you did not surrender. You transformed that experience into the fuel for your creativity. That strength is what gives your work a depth no one else can replicate. He, too, revealed his own loneliness. The pressure of standing at the very peak of the financial world, and the mistrust of people who approached him only for wealth or fame. We were alike, bound by the fact that in different ways, we had both carried wounds in our hearts and endured solitude in our lives. It did not take long for our relationship to change from friendship into love. And then, on a spring day a year after we met, we held a modest wedding in a small chapel, inviting only a few close friends. There was no lavish dress, no glittering decorations. There was only a love so true that nothing in the world could compare. Thus, I became Lily Mitchell. Yet this fact was known to no one in the world. Ryan wished for our marriage to remain private until my heart was ready. Your talent should not be confined to this small attic room. The world is waiting for you. If you so desire, I will become whatever wings you need to take flight. With his unwavering love and support behind me, I had completely regained the confidence and passion I once lost. Soon I expanded my creative work, and in the fashion world, I became whispered about with awe as the mysterious genius designer Lame, who had appeared out of nowhere. No one knew my true identity. Not my age, not my nationality, not even my face. That air of mystery only fueled the curiosity of the people even more. And then, 2 years after our marriage, the day arrived. It was the greatest festival of the fashion world, the Met Gala, held at the Metropolitan Museum of Art in New York. An invitation had come from the organizers, asking me, Lame, to create jewelry and to attend as an honored guest. For a moment, I hesitated to return to New York, where I had not set foot for 3 years. That city was where my darkest and most painful memories slept. But I was no longer the woman I had been 3 years ago. I resolved to accept the invitation. And so, the fateful night arrived. The Met Gala was a dreamlike world. The most dazzling people from around the globe laughed and chatted with champagne glasses in hand, while I stood alone on a balcony near the terrace. Ryan had stepped away for a while to greet an old acquaintance from the museum board. Separated slightly from the noise, I gazed at the night view of Central Park stretching out below me, when I heard whispers behind me. Look over there. That woman on the balcony. She's acting so high and mighty. I wonder whose guest she is. A voice I recognized, a voice I never wished to hear again. It was Claire's. Ah, probably just some rich man's mistress. Women who don't belong often sneak into this party. Ethan replied to her. They never imagined that the target of their mockery was the very woman they had believed buried forever. The moment I slowly turned to face them, their time froze completely. Claire's hand, holding her champagne glass, stopped in midair. Ethan's face went blank, his body stiffening like stone. Their eyes widened as if staring at something impossible, something that should not exist in this world. Lee? Lee? It was Ethan who first managed to speak. That voice was hoarse, as if calling out to a ghost. That can't be. Claire tried to continue with trembling lips, but no sound came. You were gone. Why are you back here? You're not supposed to be here. Yes, they had assumed that I was not only ruined, but erased entirely, socially, and perhaps even physically. The ghost of a past they believed they had buried forever now stood before them in the most radiant form. That fact shook their understanding and the false reality they had constructed to its very core. You're alive. At last, Claire forced out the words, her eyes swirling with shock, fear, and an undeniable hatred. Recovering slightly from her initial panic, she twisted her fear into anger and screamed in a shrill, hysterical voice. What is the meaning of this? Why are you here? You were as good as dead, so how can you possibly be in a place like this? It's been a long time, Claire. And you too, Ethan. My voice, in stark contrast to their agitation, was calm like the still surface of a lake. As you can see, I am far from dead. My composure only deepened their irritation. Claire stepped forward, casting a scornful glance at my dress and the necklace around my chest. I thought you had rotted away in some filthy alley. And yet here you are, dressed like that. So you must have found yourself quite the generous patron. I don't know what dirty tricks you used to survive, but that composed face of yours, it makes me sick. And then it happened. Lily, is something wrong? A voice, calm yet carrying an undeniable authority, cut through the space between us. It was Ryan. He stood by my side and gently drew me close with a protective arm around my shoulder. Ethan and Claire gasped for a moment at Ryan's refined tuxedo and his commanding presence. But since he loathed media exposure and almost no one knew his face, they fully convinced themselves that this man was my new patron. Like a cat that had found fresh prey, Claire curled her lips into a sticky smile and addressed Ryan. So, you must be this woman's new sponsor? Let me kindly warn you. She's nothing but a ghost. A curse that clings to people's lives and drags them into ruin. Don't be fooled by her appearance. That's right, Ethan added in agreement. Yet, as their vile words spilled out, Ryan's expression never changed. He simply listened in silence, as though he were watching an amusing play on stage. When they finally fell quiet, he spoke slowly. His voice was cold as ice, laced with absolute authority. Forgive my late introduction. I am Ryan Mitchell. At that name, Ethan and Claire's faces froze in shock. Ethan, in particular, well versed in the movements of the architectural world, must have understood immediately what that name signified. His face was drained of blood, and his lips began to tremble. Ryan Mitchell? You mean the one? Ryan, paying no heed to their agitation, pulled me even closer to his side and continued speaking. And the woman you have just insulted as a ghost is none other than the designer whose talent the world craves, Lame. And she is, legally, my wife, Lily Mitchell, the woman I have sworn to love for the rest of my life. Those words crashed down upon them like thunder. Your wife? Ryan Mitchell's wife? And Lame, could it really be? The sister she thought she had destroyed had instead risen to become an untouchable figure, someone far above the clouds where she could never reach. That cruel truth snapped the final thread of her sanity. Ah! The next moment, Claire let out a scream like a wild beast. There was no trace of reason left in her eyes. This is all your fault. If only you hadn't existed, I could have had it all. In her frenzy, she lunged at me. Yes, if only you weren't here. Ethan, too, swept up in the madness, made no attempt to stop her. Instead, he reached out, trying to pin me down. But their filthy hands never touched me. No one lays a single finger on my wife. With a voice that rumbled like the earth itself, Ryan moved. In an instant, he seized Claire's arm, restraining her completely, and with his other hand, he knocked Ethan's arm away. His strength was overwhelming, so much so that Ethan, a grown man, stumbled backward in shock. At a sharp glance from Ryan, a group of imposing bodyguards and security staff appeared from nowhere and immediately restrained the struggling pair. "Let go of me." "Let go," I said. "Stop this. Do you know who I am?" Their disgraceful cries echoed through the hushed venue. Celebrities from all over the world, who had gathered around, watched the shameful display with bated breath. It was the moment their social lives were utterly destroyed. Dragged away by security, Claire continued to hurl words of hatred at me until her voice finally faded into silence. By then, I had already closed my eyes softly in Ryan's embrace. When the chaos subsided, the climax of the evening arrived. The editor-in-chief of Vogue, who was hosting the event, invited me onto the stage. "Ladies and gentlemen, let us give our deepest respect to the mysterious genius designer Lame. Please, step onto the stage." Amid thunderous applause, everyone in the hall held their breath, wondering who would step onto the stage. With Ryan's gentle encouragement, I walked quietly forward. A ripple of astonishment spread through the crowd. "Why is she? Isn't she the one who was attacked just moments ago? No, it can't be." Hundreds of eyes pierced into me as I stood before the microphone. I slowly looked around the hall and then began to speak softly. "Good evening, everyone." At my first words, the hall fell into complete silence, as if struck still. "The designer you call lame is me, Lily Mitchell." That confession exploded like a bomb. Gasps of shock spread throughout the audience. The earlier attack and this shocking revelation now connected in people's minds as one single truth. The victim of that incident was the genius designer herself. They realized. I began to share the story of my rebirth. True revenge is not about defeating another. It is about seizing with your own hands the happiness and success that no one can ever take from you. And it is about forgiving the past and choosing to live while facing forward. That is what I believe. The moment my speech ended, the hall erupted in the loudest, warmest, storm-like applause I had ever heard. It was proof of heartfelt respect and empathy for the way I had lived my life. When the party was over, we stepped out onto the museum terrace. The night view of New York sparkled like a spilled jewel box. 3 years ago, I had looked up at this very skyline in despair. Now it shone beneath my feet. "You were magnificent, my queen," Ryan whispered as he gently embraced me from behind. "Thank you, Ryan. Without you, I would not be here." "No. I only helped you spread the wings you already had. The one who flew was you." My heart was filled not with the thrill of victory, but with a deep and peaceful serenity. Months passed, and now I stand once more on the soil of New York. But I am not at all the same person I was 3 years ago. My brand Lame has achieved global success, and its very first flagship store in the United States is about to open here on Madison Avenue. In this city that once cast me into the depths of despair, I have now returned as a creator and as a victor. As for Ethan and Claire, I heard of their fates through whispers. The attempted assault at the Met Gala quickly became known throughout the industry. Combined with the disgraceful truth of their affair, Ethan Brooks's name was transformed overnight, from that of a talented architect to that of a despicable criminal, and his firm was driven into de facto bankruptcy. Claire too lost everything and vanished completely from society. I listened to this news without a single stir of emotion. Neither hatred nor pity existed in my heart anymore. One afternoon, as preparations for the flagship store's grand opening neared completion, I was in my office on the top floor of the building, reviewing final designs. Over the intercom, my assistant announced, "Madame Mitchell, there is a woman here who calls herself Claire Anderson. She insists on seeing you. She does not have an appointment." At the sound of that name, my heart trembled quietly for a moment. But after a brief silence, I replied in a calm voice, "Very well. Let her in." A few minutes later, the office door opened quietly, and she appeared. Standing there was not the Claire I had once known. The expensive dresses, the flawless makeup, and above all, the piercing arrogance in her gaze, everything was gone. Dressed in a simple black dress, she was terribly thin, and in her eyes lingered only fear and deep regret. What stood before me was merely a lost, wounded woman. She stopped a few meters away from me and stood frozen, silently staring at me. It was I who broke the silence. "What is it you want, Claire?" At my calm question, her shoulders flinched. The next moment, large tears spilled from her eyes and rolled down her cheeks. "Lily." The voice she barely forced out was hoarse and broken. Slowly she walked toward me, then collapsed to her knees before me. "I'm sorry. I'm truly sorry." She pressed both hands against the floor, sobbing like a child, while I simply looked down at her in silence. I was always envious of you. Even though we were twins, you were completely different. Your talent, your kindness, the way people loved you. You always had everything. That's why I wanted it. I wanted your life itself. I thought that if I stole it, I could become like you. But I was wrong. Even after taking everything, my heart remained empty. I only became more miserable. Her confession came in broken fragments. They were the words of apology I should have longed to hear, yet my heart remained strangely calm. When Claire finally lifted her face, her eyes were swollen and red from tears. "After losing everything myself, just as you did 3 years ago, I finally understood. I finally saw how strong and beautiful you were, to be able to rise again from that place. And I finally realized how unforgivable the sins I committed truly were. I cannot ask for the selfish chance to start over. I only wanted to apologize. From the bottom of my heart." I slowly crouched down before her and gently placed my hand on her trembling shoulder. "Lift your face, Claire." At my quiet words, she looked up in surprise. "What you did to me was an attempt to kill my very soul. That wound will never fully disappear. I cannot forgive you right now." She nodded slightly, as if she had accepted everything. "Yes, I understand. But," I continued, "the hatred is gone. It ended that night. Forgiveness is not something easy. It takes time. For me, and for you, who still cannot forgive yourself." Claire remained silent, tears flowing as if she were digesting the meaning of my words. I helped her to her feet and quietly walked her to the door of my office. "Go, and from now on, live not someone else's life, but your own." Her steps were unsteady as she left the office. I hated her. And yet she is my twin, my one and only counterpart in this world. Having overcome hatred, for the first time a quiet space opened within my heart, one where I could begin to consider the possibility of forgiveness. At some point, Ryan had stepped behind me, gently wrapping his arm around my shoulder. He asked nothing, said nothing, only stayed close as if to embrace my heart itself. "What you choose to do from here is entirely up to you. Whatever decision you make, I will always remain by your side." At his warm words, I nodded softly. True revenge was over. It has never been about crushing someone else for an empty victory. What I have gained are treasures that could never be lost. True love, unshakable self-worth, and a creativity that no one could ever imitate. My life will never again be stolen by anyone.